Hello, and welcome back to Positive Fandom. I'm your host, Mmmm, and we are joined today with Catherine Cooke. How are you today, Catherine?
Good.
Excellent. And of course, we're continuing our series of reviewing the Mandalorian series, seasons 1 and 2. This is the end of season 1. We're going to be looking at chapters 7 and 8 in this video. And I have to say, Catherine, this particular episode, as you had said before, runs right into chapter 8 for the season 1, and they kind of run together. So it's very interesting to see how they did this. This was directed by, I think, was it Deborah Chow who did this one?
I think it might have, was it Deborah Chow? Because I'm gonna have to double check that real quick.
Okay.
Because I thought it was Rick Famuyiwa, but maybe not.
Yeah, maybe it was him.
I thought he did. I thought Deborah Chow joined season 2, but she might have been on season 1. See, now as we start, we're gonna start by Googling things.
It's okay. I'm the one who opened the door on this.
Let's see. Here we go. Mandalorian. Episodes. All right. Let's see. Divine. Oh no, it is Deborah Chow. Okay, wait a minute. Let's see. Oh, I see. He directed the previous one, The Prisoner. Oh yeah, so right. She directed this one, and then Taika Waititi directed the last one. Interesting.
Right. And so we were given quite a treat for chapter 7, The Reckoning, and of course it's called this because pretty much I think that Din finds that although he will continue to, let's say, hypothetically, hold on to Grogu, despite the client still wanting to possess Grogu, he's definitely between a rock and a hard place right now. He's got Grief Karga sending him messages saying, "Hey, Din, how are you?" The last time they had an encounter, they were shooting at each other, right? So now Grief Karga is obviously feeling the pressure of trying to find Din again. And, Grief has a huge part in the guild. He's maybe, one of the persons involved in, obviously he gives out assignments, but he's very well invested in the guild there. And now Grief Karga is figuring I can get more bees with honey. And he tries to sweeten the deal for Din by sending him this message, which we saw in the previous episode, but just not the entire thing, right? Right, Catherine?
Yeah, we didn't really hear what he was saying. We just knew that the message came in.
Exactly. And, this was something that I thought was very interesting was that, Grief kind of presents an option for him. Obviously, he wants to resolve this issue, and Grief will not get any rest with these, former Imperial people in his area. All the, the craziness, it's hard enough to keep the guild in order. And now something like this really disrupts the flow of power and the ability to get new jobs and even Grief's power. So, he really wants this resolved. And one of the questions that I had really was that, Grief kind of tells Din that if he follows through, brings the child back, and Din is, Karga is kind of giving him a message with an offer that Din really can't refuse, because I don't think Din can run it much longer, even though he knows it's a trap. It has to do with going against the guild code. And the thing is that Din actually did find Grogu, and he gave Grogu to the client. He did what he was asked to do. Now, he took his payment for that, and he returned back and took Grogu. Now, it's a technicality, but technically speaking, he fulfilled the wish of the client. And so what I was curious about, like when it comes to these rules in the guild, I just kind of felt like all's fair in war for the guild. It's like whoever has the biggest gun wins. But Karga was very specific when he had said something about going against the guild code, that if he brought the child back, then Din wouldn't be against the guild code. And I thought that was very interesting, because it's not just you and I who would agree with this, I think, but the stakes are much higher with this asset now. There's a little bit more to this story. And it's not just about, sort of obeying what's going on in the guild, is it anymore?
Well, no, that the asset's worth a lot of money. But the reason the code would have a problem with that is that the guild's not going to have any credibility if their bounty hunters just steal back what they've just turned in and cashed in. Nobody's going to hire them if they have that reputation, which is why it's a problem. That's why Grief Karga has an issue with it. He's like, look, we can forgive this if you just bring this back, because if this were a regular bounty, probably you wouldn't forgive it. But because this one's worth a hell of a lot of money, it's like, okay, if you bring it back this time and promise not to steal it again, then we could invite you back to the table.
I mean, it felt really good when he was when Din was in the ship and he decided he was going to go back for Grogu, and he was like, "F this, I'm going back," and you kind of knew what that meant. You could feel the momentum of this, because the client, even though he had all these stormtroopers around him, let's say remnant stormtroopers, he really is kind of vulnerable being there, and he was confident that nothing would happen once he got the child. So, I think he kind of underestimated the lore that this child has, the lore that Grogu has. And it's not just about his abilities. People are kind of like really caring about this child now. It's coming to a point where the stakes are, well, I kind of love this kid and he means something to me. And so, I think that from a guild side, they're not thinking about what that means and the type of dedication that someone like a Mandalorian might have to protect an individual over a price. So I really kind of like this deal that Grief presents to Din, because for Din, it's completely meaningless, isn't it?
Yeah, because he knows that, well, if the client obviously has Imperial ties, you can't really trust that what Grief is saying is true, because he could be saying it with a gun pointed to his head, and so which is why he decides that he's going to go get some backup before he goes back to Arvala 7. And he, of course, goes to go back to Navarro. So before he goes there, he goes to Arvala 7 to recruit Kuiil. And then, which is interesting that Kuiil agrees to do this, because it's like, he seems like he's got everything that he wants and needs, but he's still willing to, okay, I guess I'll help you. And then of course, he goes to recruit Cara Dune, because she got nothing else to do. And at first she says no, but when he mentions that it's the client was an Imperial client, she's like, oh, really? And then she's just totally on board with it. But of course, she and Kuiil don't really get along very much, which I thought was kind of funny that Cara Dune would be that short-sighted. It's like, okay, he was a prisoner, and you're going to complain about a prisoner, a slave of the Empire working for them. It's like, really? And then it felt like Mando was like trying to get two petulant children to stop arguing with each other, and you're wondering, maybe this wasn't the best idea. And of course, they kind of get a clue once the arm wrestling thing happened, which was kind of funny.
And let's talk about that arm wrestling thing, because, obviously arm wrestling is pretty much standard for any ship going through the galaxy or anywhere. Like you go to a friend's house, like, let's do an arm wrestle. It's really kind of a fun thing. It's not sort of like a life or death thing. This is not, we're not gangster arm wrestling. We all go, let me arm wrestle you. Okay. Like it's kind of a fun thing. But this one turns out to be very dangerous. And, I kind of think that, obviously it was shown to show that Grogu has other abilities, other Force abilities, because there were many iterations of Force abilities. But I kind of think that, this one I thought was interesting. And there's been a lot of speculation about this particular Force ability, because supposedly it's only or usually used or not supposed to be used by people who are or who would be considered, light side Force users. What's your take on this?
So the idea that Force choking somebody is something that only dark side could do isn't really believable, because we saw Luke do it in Return of the Jedi. I mean, Disney tries to walk it back, say, no, he just knocked him out. It's like, no, he killed those guys. He clearly killed them. Grogu's doing it not so much, though, out of like evil or hate. He's doing it because he thinks Din Djarin's in trouble. He's trying to save him, which is another reason why he's probably just able to do it easily. And because his species, as we know, is exceedingly rare and probably exceedingly gifted with the Force. But it seems like mostly light side, dark side is a point of view type of thing, which is something that Palpatine even told Anakin in Revenge of the Sith. It's like, good is a point of view. And he's like, oh, the Sith are selfish. All they care about is their power and maintaining all. It's like, what? And the Jedi don't. Although there are certain abilities which only dark side users can do, such as Force Lightning. And And, the whole resurrection stuff was implied in Rise of Skywalker to be not just a matter of science, but a matter of some really iffy Sithy type stuff, we'll call it that. Just like on the light side, you can't become a Force ghost unless you've gone through the trials and accepted your humility, everything somebody on the dark side would be incapable of doing. So I would think that Force choke, even though it's mostly been seen famously by Darth Vader, I don't think that one qualifies as being something that's so magnificent of a power that it would be one or the other. I think you could, again, because Luke did it, and so Grogu's, again, not doing it out of evil or hatred, but because he's trying to save Din.
Right. And then, of course, you could also play with it around and, you might use to save yourself, just any force ability that you would have, perhaps that might have been the one that he trained to do. They said, okay, we want you to practice. You could see him sort of like in the Jedi temple and they say, okay, today we're going to be talking about this, and, you try it, that might be something that could be dangerous if you did it on anyone who needed to breathe. But he clearly knew what he was doing. And, I think it's very interesting to see his face, Grogu's face, he starts to do it. He's so sad, like he's very, very sad. And, it's kind of like he knows what he's doing. But of course, we don't want Cara to be killed. And, Din figures out what's going on. And that's also when Kuiil starts to talk and say, now I understand what you meant when you were describing the Mughorn thing. Now I get it. Something's happening. What this child can do is just so extraordinary that,
funny. It's almost like, oh, do it again, Grogu. Let's see. Because she was like, obviously, Cara was really hostile to it. And I love the double take that Din does when he sees the kids doing the magic hand thing, and I kind of stop it.
Yeah. And so, I think that, between the fact that we're seeing these extraordinary feats performed by Grogu, and oftentimes they're very unexpected, but oftentimes they kind of save the day. Clearly he has skills, and, they're not necessarily on demand, as we also see in the next few episodes. But he has these skills, and he uses them, I guess, when he sees fit, or when he recognizes something. And I kind of wonder to myself, something that I had always thought about, but it's not that I didn't get an answer to it, or I was only just curious about it, since it's somebody who is able to use the Force with another Force user can kind of communicate without speaking, so to speak, using verbal language. But I always got the impression that Force users could also communicate with people, even if they didn't have the Force, or be able to sense people's emotions. And so I think that, I don't think that Mando felt he was in danger of death. But I think that this might been one of the times when Grogu decided to decide on his own, perhaps not sensing everything that was around him, that he had to intervene. So was this the best form of intervention? No, no. He could have made her fall asleep or something, but, perhaps this might have been a more extreme version of intervening. But so, Kuiil, as you said, has joined the crew, and he's there with his blurgs. And Kuiil has done something that makes Din very uncomfortable, and that is to rehabilitate the IG-11 unit. And, as we learn, and as we've seen, even with IG-88s, I think, which might be one of the other droids that's very, very similar looking to an IG-11, usually they're, they kill people, and they're used for fighting. And so, however, they have many skills, but they're both shocked to see this IG-11 unit kind of come in and say, would you like some tea? Like, it's terrifying to them. And they both draw their guns. Do you think this is really commonplace in the galaxy? I mean, Kuiil has amazing skills, but do people go ahead and take 6 or 7 months out of their life to kind of like do an IG-11 unit to do whatever they want with it? Do you think that's something that happens a lot?
Probably not, but as Kuiil mentioned when he bid goodbye to Din Djarin the first time, he says, "Thank you for bringing peace to my valley." So that was obviously troubling for him to have all these troublemakers there. So it might benefit him to have a skilled assassin droid. Because at first it probably wasn't programmed for nursing, because he didn't know that Din was coming back with the kid. So he just programmed it for probably defense and to obey him. Because the original IG series of droids came from Hollow-On Laboratories, and they became self-aware and, you know, killed their masters before they got any really official assignments. And so it makes you wonder, since they took contracts from whoever would give them a contract, what it is that they're spending the money on. oil baths. Like, I don't know. So the fact that IG-11 is also now a bounty hunter says he probably was one of those series of Hollow-On droids. And the fact that Kuiil has done that, he might have seen it as a fun project to do, because there's not really much going on at Kuiil's farm. And for a guy who says he used to use his hands and do all this kind of manual labor, all these different types of tasks, it might have just been like something to keep, pass the time. And so he's fine letting this droid serve and protect him at his leisure. And he's right when he says that, look, there's nothing to fear. It's simple programming, something that Din is way too paranoid about. He doesn't care that, the fact that it can even kill is bad enough. We shouldn't trust it. And we've seen something like this before in Clone Wars, where Anakin and Obi-Wan went to Iego, and they met this kid, this 11-year-old, who had reprogrammed an entire battalion of battle droids to serve him.
Yes.
And it's like, so this type of stuff has happened before, and so it's kind of neat to see it with an assassin droid, because it was so jarring initially, like we mentioned in the previous reviews, to see this droid in action, and to now see it bringing in tea and being a polite, butler type is just so jarring to figure,
Yeah, I would say, imagine reprogramming a tank, to to do something like that, and you'd be like, well, that's a tank. I don't know if I want a tank, around me right now. That would be the closest analogy I could make. It's not really a good one, but you would never imagine a tank would sort of like bring you tea. So it's very interesting that was what he used. And of course, as he described, I like the vignette where they showed you how he did it, but it was probably 6 or 8 months that it took him to do all of that. And Kuiil is probably one of those individuals who can do a lot of things. And so having him as an asset would really help any team. He goes ahead and builds Grogu a new pod for him to be in, so he's more comfortable. But you're right. He and Cara still have just a little bit of tension between the two of them. And it's unfortunate, Kuiil, is really just straight up and down honest. He's not hiding anything. He's certainly not hiding the way Cara is hiding, hiding out. So Kuiil is just an honest person and just wants peace in his valley. That's all he wants. And also, now that he has his team, Din knows he's walking into this and this is going to be a trap. And so they meet Greef on the planet. And, I think it's interesting that Greef thinks that somebody wants the child for a menagerie. And certainly, it's just the overall just not even knowing what this child is. Why are so many people still ignorant of the Force and what's going on, you think?
That's a good question. I mean, I get why they're ignorant of Grogu's species, because they would never say what the species is called or what planet it's from, and we don't see. This is only the third time we've seen a character of that species in Star Wars. We don't even see them in the background of extras at the market or anything like that, or on Coruscant. So I get the sense that the fact that these people were, admittedly, this is deep in the Outer Rim, and the Jedi at their peak during the prequel trilogy numbered about 10,000, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't when you consider the the millions of stars and planets, billions of stars and planets, I should say, that are out there. So I guess if you're really far removed from the Republic and the inner core worlds, that you wouldn't really know about it. And even then, it's still a bit strange, because the Force, as we know, can be within anybody. It's not just Jedi or Sith. So the fact that they're so unaware of it, I guess they just, for the sake of convenience, the writers are specifically setting this series in places where they haven't really been that familiar with it. And sure enough, even though Darth Vader uses the Force, how often does somebody in the Empire actually get to see Darth Vader, and actually witness that? If you heard a story being passed along of one of the crazy feats he did with the Force, you'd be like, yeah, they're just, exaggerated. Nobody's really going to believe it. And so I guess that's sort of the idea. It's kind of reminding the audience that, hey, the galaxy is a really big place. And contrary to what the Skywalker saga makes you think, it's not actually anywhere near as commonplace for people in the galaxy to see well-trained, Force users around. Or if they are around, maybe they're hiding the fact that they have those abilities,
Yeah, and it's true that we've been spoiled and we've seen Coruscant and we get to like see, their enclave, let's say the Jedi Temple where they live and everything. For all practical purposes, a lot of people would see them as sort of like these monks or sect of people who keep to themselves really because and what do they do in there? It's a lot of the stuff is privatized, a lot of the knowledge is privatized. And so unless you're around them a lot, there's still so much that you don't get to hear about because that library has been kept private. Things are trapped in holocrons and all sorts of stuff. So there's a good chance that you wouldn't hear about it. But there are apparently, and we're going to see in this episode that there are some people who do know what was going on. And I suspect, and I'm sure as well as you do, because they witnessed a lot of what had happened 20 years ago or more. And so it's very interesting as this entire interaction with Grief Karga and Grogu happens. Din kind of has his hand on his holster, but Grief Karga's kind of like looking at Grogu, and he's like, he's kind of cute though. He's got a little cutie, like completely taking him away from the whole point of what he's supposed to be doing. And I think it's very funny that, Grogu seems to win over a lot of people just by charm alone. So
it's also kind of like when Quill first saw me, like, this is what all the fuss was about. They're just kind of, in a sense, it's a very small-minded way of thinking of things. Like, oh, just because Grogu's small, that must mean he's unimportant or ridiculous. And yet they like the first time that Din tried to escape with Grogu and Grief was there to stop him. Grief didn't actually see Grogu because he was in the pram and the pram was closed. Well, now he's actually seeing it, and he's kind of surprised as to what this is. But for Grief, it's also about, hey, the money, because he's still interested and he's also smart because they're not meeting in the middle of town. They're way off on I guess you'd call them the lava flats or near the hot springs. What looks to be a couple days journey from down from the town, which is pretty smart on Grief's part because you could tell, even though they had a past scrap, he still likes Din. He genuinely likes him. He's like, he doesn't want to kick him out of the guild. He's like, man, I got to follow guild rules. I can't really help it. You're kind of, pushing me on the edge here. So he's smart and says, let's meet way out here. So that way, there's not an Imperial ambush or anything. Because I'm pretty sure he didn't tell the client where he was going to meet him for this secret rendezvous, even though he does have his own nefarious plan. I think that, yes, even though Grief is secretly planning to just kill them and take the kid, I think if that was his intention all along, I don't think he would go that far out. Like 2 days journey, it's like pretty far. I think he's actually also perhaps secretly hoping that he wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, he's hoping that because Din came out that they were going to change their mind and just surrender the asset again. And so it's funny, as Grief Karga says, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about. They sort of get attacked by these creatures at night, being out there, at night.
That was a great sequence because they're like sitting around the fire, they're just talking, everything's going well, and then bam, and it just happens like mid-sentence, it just comes out, and because of all the smoke being created by the fire and how dark it is, you can't even really get a full look at these things, and it's like really like a jump scare when they first arrive, and they even carry off one of the blurgs, and Kuiil is obviously very distressed by this, and Grief Karga gets like slashed open by one of them, and it's like, oh man, this is pretty brutal.
Yeah, it was fast and dirty, wasn't it? Like,
yeah, and it's like when you see the aerial shots of when they're flying into the you don't see like forests anywhere, and I'm not seeing really any caves because this looks like a flat land with no nothing. It's like, where did these come from? They must have flown from maybe the mountains, nocturnal, flying dozens and dozens of miles, I guess, because they kind of look like like pterodactyls or something.
Yeah, it was a pitch black moment, like this it's like, don't go out at night. Why? Like this it was like for a second I was concerned, of course, about the heroes in the story, but clearly, they were all in danger equally, and it was just fate as to who got picked off. And you said they picked up a blurg, so they're really strong because those things are enormous.
Yeah.
And then when all was said and done, it looked like Grief Karga was done for. But this was the moment we've been waiting for from episode 2 that Grogu tried to do this, and he was kind of like put back in the pram, like. Yeah,
this bit was really funny too.
Mm-hmm. He was like, it's gonna eat me, and I'm like, okay, you're like huge. So he just like, now this is something else that I think is very interesting is that, like I said, Grogu tends to pick and choose when he wants to do something. And, you know, I just can't, I'm not trying to completely understand all his motivations. He is supposed to be still a child, but, you know, God bless him for healing Grief Karga. You know, I just think it was almost completely, it was just really a great hero moment. But it was also the moment that really changed the course of events. I mean, this was, you know, one of those things that happened that if it didn't happen, Grief Karga would have died, and then the bounty hunters would have come after them. It would have been a disaster without Grief Karga. What do you think?
Absolutely, and the fact that Grogu saved him is like that's and like you would think that Din Djarin would have already been wowed by the fact that this little baby could stop the giant mudhorn and that it could force choke somebody. But I guess he wasn't that impressed up to that point. But now seeing that it could actually heal severe wounds, he's like, oh my God, you know, and granted, you don't see his face because he's wearing the helmet, but you get it. And especially the Kara's reaction, Kuil's reaction, they're just unbelievable. And it's like, is this something we really want to do? And it's kind of funny because the next morning they keep pressing on. It's like, you've seen this absolutely magnificent thing. And it's like, the client, you could tell, like, yeah, he has Imperial ties, but you don't get the sense that he's somebody who could chase you all the way across the galaxy. It's like, you could do all sorts, and seeing as these, as while they are our heroes, they're still a merry band of, you know, profiteers, if you will.
Yes.
So I thought it was odd that after witnessing this, that they're still pressing on, and the only person to have a change of heart is Grief Karga, because he spins around and kills his two partners. And I was surprised that Din Djarin didn't do a quick draw immediately to shoot him at this. He kind of almost hesitated for a second before Grief kind of puts his hands up. He's like, okay, the plan was to kill you and take the kid, but after last night, I can't. And I was like, what does it say that Grief Karga is the person who has the moral compass in this situation and not, you know, Kara, Din, and Kuil, you know?
I mean, I think that it says a lot, and it also shows that Grief Karga has been trying to calculate how he's going to benefit from all this. And now all of a sudden this benefit doesn't seem to mean very much anymore because this, you know, Grogu saved his life because he would have died from the poison in this wound. But, you know, now all of a sudden that monetary payout doesn't matter to him either. Mm-hmm. So he's on the same page with them. And there's no way that he could have convinced the other two bounty hunters this is the right thing to do because Grogu didn't save their lives. So they don't look at Grogu the same way, even though they witnessed, you know, something that was incredible. It was not life-changing for them. So they're not very interested in negotiating right now. All they want is a payout. And they feel like they actually feel like they've earned a bit already just by escorting them to this point on the lava flats. So
yeah, plus they weren't wearing name tags. They didn't have names. They didn't say anything. So yeah, they're expendable. Who cares?
Pretty much. And I'm kind of glad that he had to do that.
Yes.
There wasn't going to be, you know, they would have called more people. It just would have been a disaster. They needed the time to talk. And now that they did kind of work out some kind of plan with Kuil taking the child back to the ship, and it has to be on the down low because, you know, they're being watched. The planet's being watched. Now that they've landed, you know, I don't think Din could kind of fly him back to the ship. You know, I think that would have stuck out like a sore thumb. And so to kind of have Kuil kind of just, hey, why don't you take one of the blurgs and walk on over to the ship and activate the protocols? You should be safe. And of course, Kuil knows what he's doing. But it was kind of hard to see him kind of run off on the blurg. You're like, doesn't he have a land speeder or something? Like,
yeah, you had to camp out all night. Are you going to be safe if it takes till nightfall and beyond to get, which I think is a continuity error because it seems like the rest of this episode takes place on the same day. And yet, I mean, unless when they landed the previous day to meet Grief Karga, unless that was a much later in the day, because it seems like if that's the case, then he should have to be traveling at night. And I don't know, it's a little weird. But and it's also odd that he doesn't have the ability to call the droid from he doesn't have a comms link to the ship, because the whole time I'm thinking and that's another. It's like, okay, if the Razor Crest has self-defense protocols of its own, why didn't you bring the droid with you to begin with? Because the droid is already, you know, because I get that they were initially going to hand it over anyway, but dude, they know that Grief Karga wasn't entirely trustworthy, and so they're not going to bring the assassin droid. I thought that was a little odd, and it's like, okay, some of that might be Din Djarin's prejudice still. Like he still doesn't want to trust this guy, and I guess that might be part of it. So it's funny that they do take the pram though, and they keep it closed, and it's like, and I'm even thinking, come on, this isn't going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember what that's called when you kind of like, the fake out, like in football, you pretend you have the football here and it's not there, and then they're like, oh, the football's over there, but it's interesting because now Din decides to put on, some handcuffs, some wrist shackles, and walks into the city with Grief Karga, which seems to make sense because Grief Karga, that's his town, right? He's the one who normally runs the show. And that trooper who says, hey, I'll give you 20 credits for the Mando. So, we see these sort of, what we would expect to see, from soldiers who might say, yeah, I'd love to get a Mando. I just like a collector here is like, oh, I just got a new Mando hat from Sideshow or something, like he's treating it just like something like that. But it's interesting because when they get back, something is immediately wrong. They enter in what used to be Grief Karga's
the bar, the cantina.
Yeah, it used to be his, and the client's kind of like in charge there. And he's like, let me give you a libation. And as soon as he's about to give the libation, there's some hologram, and we get to see a character who
well, it's funny because right before that happens, even when they're walking in, Kara keeps, because Kara's there too, and she keeps saying, he said there were only going to be 4. And he's like, and Groot's like, what can I tell you? I don't know. And then they go in the cantina, and then there's more, and then the more of them start showing up, and she's just kind of egging him on about this, and that the client wants to actually see the asset. And he's like, no, you can't. It's sleeping. We'll be very quiet. And of course, they're saved by the hologram, which is yeah.
Now, this hologram? I didn't really understand what was going on when I first saw the episode. Who was contacting the client? And of course, this character pretty much is maybe one of the most important characters in the series, Moth Gideon. And he's been important in a lot of events that have happened, let's say, in the past 20, 30 years, and is a former Imperial. And he is the actual person who hired the client, isn't he?
Yeah, he hired the client to kill the baby. Or at least, it's kind of odd. This is where the series kind of gets a little muddy, because it was very clear that the client wanted the asset dead. And when the doctor heard that, he's like, no, that's not what we agreed. He's like, oh, shut up. And then he tells Mando, oh, I understand. Okay, we'll pay you a fee if it's live, but I understand accidents happen. Like in this line, like he clearly wants the asset dead. But given Moff Gideon's affiliations and what we find out from him and what he's up to in the second season, it makes it seem like he would clearly want the asset alive, unless he thinks he could salvage just when it's dead, just take its DNA or something. So it seems a little iffy as to why the client and the doctor were not on the same page about it, or because the doctor was the one who insisted that he tried to save the baby's life. They were going to kill it, and who knows, maybe they did think they were just going to kill it and use it. I just found that to be a bit odd. Like, the Kaminoans didn't feel the need to, ambush Django and kill him and just use his body. They're like, no, they're just going to treat him nice and all that kind of thing. So given the implications of what Moff Gideon is up to, I did find it odd that, like, did he want the kid dead? I don't really know. And it's funny that when he shows up on the hologram, he just asks very straight up. Like, he already knows that, dude, they would not have walked the kid in here. And it's like, wait a minute. Does he already know? He must know Din Djarin from somewhere. And the reason he knows him is because he's a Mandalorian, and we find out that he had been responsible for the Purge of Mandalore, and whereas Cara Dune recognizes him as a guy who was in charge of a faction on Endor, which he was a veteran of that campaign. So it's like, okay, so this guy's kind of a big deal. And I just thought that was really funny when the client is like, oh, okay, I guess I should check if my kid's still here. And before long, he just turns around and then bam, it's just like a big jump scare. The windows just shatter, and I'm like, my jaw dropped. I'm like, oh my God, he killed the client. And then it becomes like a big, initially they have to dive for cover, and it's like, oh man, what's going on now? And it's like, oh geez, this is pretty intense.
Well, I understand why Moff was more firm with the client this time, because the client lost the kid the first time.
Right.
So, once they had secured the asset, he probably sent Moff the message, yeah, I have him. And then the next thing you know, he doesn't have him. So Moth is not going to make that mistake again. And that's clearly what we see here. I think that he knew the client might get the child back, but he had no confidence in the client being able to hold on to the child. And looking from Moth's point of view, what the client did was a huge misstep. The client may be unaware that he's in trouble with Moth. Moth is only keeping him alive until the baby shows up. And, unfortunately, he paid the price for that. But in addition to that situation, we find out that upon communicating with Kuil's transmission from Din to him gets intercepted, and 2 scout troopers are heavy on the pursuit with Kuil, and it's just right before he gets to the ship.
That's a great editing bit, because it keeps going back and forth between the scout bikers, Kuil, and then Kara and Mando and Grief Karga trying to figure out what are we going to do to get out of here, and the troops keep arriving and surrounding him, and finally the TIE fighter comes in. A neat one too. The way it lands is folding its wings, and I like how the camera. I was really curious, how is he actually going to get out of this thing? And then the camera cuts before you actually see it. I'm like, and he's. But then when they cut back to the wide shot, there's like no ladder or anything there. It's like, what? Did he just jump down? I guess. And you see him walking forward, and I like that he's got the red and the cape that's red on the inside. But it's a big deal.
It's all about style with Moth. He's coming in there and he's seen that and he's done that. And he wants you to know he's there. I do want to ask you this question about that TIE fighter. Is that the first time that we've seen a TIE fighter do that in live action, let's say?
I believe so, for that particular one, yes.
Mm-hmm. So, that's very exciting to see stuff, especially like that, where we haven't seen that before. And, of course, we recognize a TIE fighter right away. But to see him kind of it go down and then him pop out, and it's just, Moth Gideon is an extraordinary person, and he has planned for this for a long time, hasn't he?
Right, and I like how he just doesn't even want to talk. He just cuts the chase. You have something I want. It's like, okay, that's a bit direct. And they're like, what are we gonna do? And I like that they don't actually show Kuil get it. Like, they just cut to him. And you hear Mando shouting, Kuil, come in. And you just see him dead and the child's gone. And it's like, that's really sad, because Kuil was such a great character.
He really was. Gosh, it's too bad.
Yeah, it was a shame, but it does, I guess it has the intended effect. It makes you feel that, okay, anybody's expendable now. And that's where they have the initial cliffhanger ending for halfway through the season finale.
Oh my God, they got us.
Yeah, that was probably the longest wait between episodes. That one was just like, because I personally wasn't a fan of the fourth, fifth, and sixth episodes. So I'm like, come on. So this one's like finally picking it up. It's like, oh, now you're gonna leave us dangling on that,
And they really did. I mean, I was like, I can't wait for this new episode. You remember it used to premiere at 3 a.m. I guess for me, midnight for you, perhaps. And I was like, I'm staying up for this one. I got to see what happens in the finale. So of course we're talking about, after Kuil is killed, Grogu is abducted, and our heroes are trapped in the bar with an E-Web repeating cannon right outside the door, and they're given till nightfall, pretty much, which is not very much time at all, right? For the following episode, Chapter 8, Redemption. And we do see that, unfortunately, the child is with these scout troopers who really don't care about the child, and they're just like, okay, we got it, let's go and bring it to Moth. But then we learn that Moth is kind of crazy, or so to speak, when it comes to his relationship to the troopers, so to speak.
Oh yeah, well, they don't really know much about him. Like, the one trooper keeps bugging the other. He wants to see it, and what does he want to do with it? They're like, I don't know, maybe he wants to eat it. It's like, I like that he's keeping the kid, outside of town, because he doesn't want to risk losing the asset, which again suggests to me that Moff maybe doesn't want to kill the asset, because otherwise, why not bring it in amongst all that firepower and just be done with it? That's a little weird. So he's like, keep the kid at safe distance, but you got him. Great. And they start arguing back and forth because they're just really bored just sitting around. And then they finally goes to check on it, and Grogu, being smart, bites the trooper's fingers. And then you have the most evil moment possibly in Star Wars when the scout trooper punches him.
It was so horrible, Catherine. I was just like, oh my God. And you could hear him go, and it's like, no, what did you do to him? I just was like, they could have really hurt him. Like they could have really given him broken bones. And I was like, this is so abusive. But
yeah,
I'm like,
well, I know that they're going to be Scout Trooper cosplayers are going to be the scourge of celebration next year.
Well, have we really ever seen Scout Troopers like this before, Catherine?
They never really get into the personality of any of the stormtroopers or the snowtroopers or the scout troopers. They're just like numbers, which is why there was always the running joke that they weren't good at shooting anything and were dumb because they don't have any personalities. So the only little hint of a personality they have is their fighting skills. And so that's why everybody always made fun of them, which is, again, how that joke made its way into episode 6. So the fact that the episode 6 of Mandalorian, that is. And so now that we actually get to see them like talking and realize they're just kind of like regular people, it's on the one hand, they don't seem as intimidating anymore, but on the flip side, you don't really like them at all. And so it's great when IG-11 finally shows up and first he gives them a chance. He orders them to surrender the child or whatever. Like, I forget, the troopers are initially hostile towards it, but I like that he's not gonna beat around the bush on this one.
No, and what's so interesting about IG-11 is that he seems quite just normal, like let's say you ask a question, you get like a response of about a 1 back. But when they say, he says, I'm ordering you to release the child. And they're like, well, we're not going to do that. And then it's like, pow, he annihilates them. He rips their arm off. He grabs the child and he's like, he went from 0 to 60 in a few seconds. And he's in a rush to tell Din and bring Din back to them. And I'm like, well, he should have gone to the ship and and kind of like gotten the hell out of there. And wherever they ended up is where they end up. But that's, maybe not the best place for them to be. But for whatever reason, IG-11 goes and finds Din and Cara and Greef, and pretty much blows up the whole town.
It's great because he's zooming through the streets on the speeder bike, and Grogu's just having a great time, and he's just blasting everything to smithereens. Gideon goes to get cover, and then you just have the battle, and eventually it gets pretty fierce. And of course, they're too outnumbered, so he can't pull a lot of the same stunts he did last time, and they end up all kind of barricading themselves in the inside the cantina, and that's when Moth brings 4 of these like flame troopers. And it's pretty cool because they tease this in other movies. We don't really get to see it. And now we get to see how they're just burning the cantina to the ground with their incendiaries. And I liked how, they couldn't figure out how to get out of there, but they see of all the weapons that Din Djarin has, he doesn't have something that can blast a small grate or cut through it. And he's like, you droid now. And he just easily removes it. And so that was pretty great, but they do almost get taken out here by the flame trooper that comes in.
They do. Before we get to that point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, we see a flashback of Din, do we not?
Yeah, I think we finally get to see the rest of it because throughout the series at various points you get to see bits and pieces of this, and he's finally rescued, and we see what actually the full scope of what happened. It was like a separatist attack. His parents were killed, and then he got rescued by the Children of the Watch, which at the time we didn't know their names yet. We just knew they were Mandalorians, and that they adopted him and took off. And so that's kind of neat that we get to see the ending of that right as we're about to see what we think is the ending of Din Djarin in the show.
It really was. It's almost like Din was sort of like seeing his life flash in front of his eyes. And we got a chance to see that flash, and it was a lot of information. We saw presumably Din's parents. And, they seemed like, as you said, were under attack, and they happened to be under attack by droids. And this was pretty significant because it looked like Din's parents may have been killed by these droids. They were killing everybody on the planet. And Din was hidden inside of this bunker. And as he was hidden there, his parents most likely were killed. And of course, here's this droid opening up the bunker. And, he just kind of closes his eyes thinking he's going to get killed. And somebody shoots the droid. And it's a Mandalorian, and they got that music. It's like, it's like the Mandalorians are here, like this victory music. And he looks pretty cool. Like the armor looks great. And he's looking at Din, and he's like, he puts his hand out, and he does this thing where he goes, and Din kind of like grabs onto him. And as Din comes out of the bunker, he looks around like this. And all you see are these Mandalorians floating in, because they always look like they're floating. Obviously, they're not floating. They've got jetpacks on them, but they always look like they're floating, and they're just like they land. And they're like, taking out these droids. And you can see, like, for Din, that must have been such an extraordinary moment. I mean, of course, he's terrified. He lost his parents. But to see these Mandalorians must have been something like, oh, my God, I can't believe this is happening right now. And he goes with them, and they tell him to go. And you can see him holding on to the Mandalorian. He's probably about 7 or 8, right? What an amazing situation to see. And we actually get to witness the foundling thing, which is why I think that if I were to live in a Mandalorian culture, I would fit right in, because then I could adopt a child if I wanted to, no problem. And, like I could, it would just be something that would be accepted as a norm. And I think it's very interesting that they had to come up with, let's say, a practical solution for when they may have been conquering other clans, or however things may have gone. What happens to the children? Well, we're going to protect those children. They're going to become foundlings and part of our family. And I think that was really important. And I think we see that in Din, although he was unaware that that's what was happening to him when he found the child. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that's probably why it's flashing back to him at this particular moment, because they're all cornered. They're about to get it, albeit not by droids, but by other troopers. And it's like he's been doing this to protect this kid, sort of like the other Mandalorians had done to protect him, which is what makes the next scene a little odd. But at this particular moment, it's really great that he kind of sees that. And right when you think he's about to get blown away by the incendiaries, Grogu does it again. And it's like, cool, not only do you have the ability to stop like tangible objects, you can actually stop flames and balls of fire and just spew it back in the other direction. Which
now,
was really
I'm sorry, is this the first time we've seen this, Catherine?
Yeah, I've never seen Jedi or Force users do that before, like try and grab an explosion and throw it around, and he just does that. But of course it takes a lot of energy out of him, and that's the moment when they're gonna, okay, time to go. But Din, as we see, has been injured. It's like,
yeah, and it looks like it might even be mortally injured. He's in a bad way. He's like, I'm not going to make it. Like, this is the first time we've ever heard Din even say words like that. Not like, I'm injured. Leave me behind and I'll join you later or something. He's saying, I'm not going to make it. Like, I've been hurt pretty badly and it's over for me. And, despite everything that's happened right now, it looks like he really isn't going to make it. I mean, from what we can see, no one is offering a solution. And he gives the child to Cara and says, hey, take this mythosaur chain and necklace and show it to everybody in the bunker and they will take you in. And it looks really bad. And they kind of go, but then IG-11 kind of is, I guess he's more than a nursemaid, isn't he?
Well, yeah, and being a nursemaid, he knows how to heal. And so he knows that, hey, you're not necessarily going to be mortally wounded if you take this back to spray. But he won't, because no living person can see in my face. He's like, well, I am not alive. And it's funny that while he's saying that, he has the gun pointed right at him. And so it's like, even when he finally lifts the mask off, he still has the gun pointed at him.
Yes.
It's not going to change.
Well, I remember when I first saw this scene a few years ago, Catherine, and how, we knew it was Pedro Pascal under the mask. We knew that. There wasn't, we weren't surprised, like, who is this actor and what does he look like? There certainly wasn't that. But it did feel like such a great reveal when we saw it, didn't it? Yeah,
kind of. I mean, I was kind of a bit, okay, there he is. I wasn't as jazzed by it, but I guess because it's people who probably aren't like the type who are going to go look everything up online, it'll be kind of surprising for them, like, oh, who is it, And it's funny that, he just, IG-11 just sprays the back to spray, and he stays behind a little bit, and then eventually catches up with them in the tunnels.
Yes.
Like, oh, yes. You're here. And
Absolutely. So, like a great reveal in the sense that, he never takes his mask off. So, now all of a sudden, this is a time where he just really is so vulnerable that if he doesn't take it off, he's going to die, And so,
it's a robot, so he's fine with it. And it's like,
yeah, I'm not a living thing. And I'm like, yeah, I guess he is it, So, we get to see his face, and he does kind of look like he's worried that he's not going to make it. Like he has a worried look on his face. And finally, when they do get into the caves, the first thing I'm wondering is, where are all the children that were running around? Where is everybody? Like it's like a ghost town in there. And then we see the unfortunate sight of a pile of Mandalorian helmets and armor in a pile, but there aren't any Mandalorians around. And so, Din is very upset by this. You're wondering where everybody is, and clearly they wouldn't have left their armor behind. And that's when we learn from the armorer that, unfortunately, when you guys
got really angry at Grief Karga, he thought he did it.
And yes, he did.
About to jump him and kill him and that's only then did the armorer finally reveal herself. And she's like, hey, we made our choice. We don't regret it.
And this isn't the first time that she's had to stop a fight between Mando and someone else. She did this, with the heavy infantry Mando, when they kind of got into like a tiff about armor or something. And she was like, okay, that's enough. And, let's go on with our day. But, she explains what's happened, and she is actually taking the armor and smeltering or doing whatever. And she at this very climactic moment asks Mando or Din, I want to see this child that, this person or this creature that has caused, like the whole world to pretty much fall apart, and we lost our bunker, like, who is this? She doesn't say it that way, but she says, where's this child or person? And I think it's really interesting in the sense that, she tells him, she's like, this individual is not your enemy, but a foundling in your care, and you must reunite the creature with its own kind.
That's the interesting thing about it. So, well, the first thing she does, she perks up immediately. She's like, oh, is this what you were talking about earlier when you said your enemy didn't know you was your enemy? And he's like, oh, well, in that case, since this is basically a foundling, then you are a clan of two. And so she makes the pauldron of the clan Mudhorn, because that's really what she figures united them, which is kind of cool. But this is the part which I thought was odd, that when she mentions that this is a foundling and you have to reunite it with its kind and all that, Din gets a bit defensive about this, and he doesn't really want to do it. And I'm thinking, well, haven't you kind of already been doing that for this whole weeks or months at time? Like, you stuck your neck out to save this kid on multiple occasions now, at great detriment to yourself. So why is it really a surprise when the armorer says that, okay, this is basically a foundling? That's kind of the relationship they already have anyway. So I thought that was really weird that he got so, upset about that.
Yeah, and maybe it stung a little bit for him, knowing that he really was not actually free like he was before, and he's been pretty much told by his leader that this is the way, this is how we roll, this is the way, and this is what you're expected to do, and therefore you should do this. Now he's been told in front of everybody else. It's not even in private anymore. Even Grogu heard it. Even Grogu was like, oh, like, oh, you're my dad now. Like, this is very different experience versus privately talking to somebody about like, well, what are you going to do with your life? Well, I'm going to take this child. Well, now guess what? All your close friends know that you have to take the child, including the child. And that child's not stupid. He's going to remember how you are, like, he's going to remember this moment. She makes the signet for him, which I thought was like a rite of passage in Mandalorian culture, maybe, because now he has his own clan. So if he has his own clan, Catherine, can he do whatever he wants to do now?
That's the thing. It's like, because the armorer says that you're a clan of two, but then she says you have to return him to his own kind or raise him. It's like, well, if he returns him to his own kind, then they wouldn't be a clan of two anymore, because he wouldn't really be there. And so that's kind of odd that it's like, yes, he has the option of keeping him and raising him as a foundling, more so if he fails to find out where Grogu's kind are. So I thought that was odd, because technically you wouldn't be a clan of two anymore once that happens. So it is a little contradictory, a little, okay. And I like that, the armor makes that they invite the armor to come along with them, but she's like, no, I have work to do here. She clearly had gathered up all that armor very specifically and put it there. And who knows if she's saving it for other Mandalorians she might know, other enclaves, because it is cool though that when the stormtroopers do arrive, she just totally takes them, not with guns or anything, but with her actual smelting tools.
Yeah, those forging weapons. I mean, she fights all those stormtroopers off with ease. And I think one of them had kind of pushed her face like this. Yeah. And I'm like, oh boy. Like you were like, oh boy, it's going down. And it does. And she just kind of like, no weapons, as you said, no lasers, nothing. Just pure finesse with her forging weapons. And apparently she can fight with those weapons too. Who knew? I mean, I would have never guessed that she could just use those as a sparring tool. But apparently she has many skills. And, we've kind of accepted her as almost like the leader of the group, let's say in these episodes. And, we have no reason not to, but she seems to be the person who's most knowledgeable. She admitted that she knew about Mandalore the Great and the sorceress called Jedi. So she knew a lot more. And I don't think that she's been holding back information, but I just think that she hasn't had a chance to tell everybody every detail. She's very busy. She's making armor. She's making weapons. Like, she's not sort of like hanging out, on a throne or doing nothing. Like, she's extremely busy running this clan. And I was kind of curious, like, in regards to, like when you have your clan, and because, we've seen a number, like we have Clan Vizsla, Clan Ren, like we've seen these different clans. But I'm kind of curious, like, if you get into a clan, are you always part of that clan? Like, I'm just curious and thinking, like what you've said, Catherine, once he gets returned, is he still Clan Mudhorn? And I'm almost inclined to think he will always be Clan Mudhorn. What do you think?
Well, in a sense, he wouldn't really be part of the clan anymore. And like, if they ever cross paths again, sure, but he's not living that lifestyle. And the fact that when she says his own kind, she assumes Jedi. And when she tells Din Djarin who the Jedi are, he's like, "You want me to return this kid to a race of enemy warriors who tried to kill us all?" And she just says very frankly, "This is the way." So she's drunk on the Kool-Aid as well. And so,
you want me to what?
He doesn't have a way to really get around that, and so they just kind of accept it and take off. Of course, he's clearly not really enthused.
No, he's not.
Yeah, I guess, like, you don't know, who are they? He's like, oh, she's like, they fell 20, 30 years ago, whatever. And it's like, and how am I supposed to find out? I don't really know. Just, find them, do what you do, And it's just kind of like, hey, she's like, this isn't my problem. You know the drill. You've grown up here, So she just kind of doesn't hold anything against him for it, for getting all of them killed, essentially, because he's like, hey, we made the decision. And she doesn't give him any hints as to where she might be going, where these other enclaves. Maybe she doesn't want him to show up again.
Maybe it's a good thing that he doesn't show up, because he's such a high he himself has now become a target.
Exactly. And so she's like not going to tell him where she's going, and they don't really take the time to ask. So, because they get rushed along with cars, like, we got to go. So
he asks her to come with them, right? That's what he says.
Yeah,
come
they
with
invited
us.
her, and she's like, no, I still have business here.
I'm not going with you guys. You go ahead.
Yeah, I'm certainly gonna leave all that Beskar behind.
yeah, I'll catch up with you later. And that was something else that I hadn't actually, but I did want to get your opinion on it, only because, I'm not going to say it is or isn't. Obviously his armor, whether it's pure Beskar or not, has a high level of Beskar. Let's say it's like maybe the highest alloy or whatever you want to call it of Beskar. He's got the top of the line Beskar suit. And she, of course it was going to stand out. Of course it was going to stand out. Like, people are going to notice this suit. No one has anything like this. Was it putting him in unnecessary danger, or could he just handle it? He can take it.
What putting him in unnecessary?
Making his suit so bright. Maybe, you could have painted it or
yeah, I guess they could have painted it, but they're also didn't really have time to hang around to paint it. And I guess that maybe it's sort of like the Empire thing, or the reason they wore white is because they want to stand out, because they think they're great fighters, even though they're not. And so with him, it's like, okay, this is going to be very striking. This is going to catch everybody's attention in the room, and that's maybe what you want. at least from the armor perspective. Plus, I think, or from a design sense, the design team's just like, you know what, this looks cool.
Yeah, and it does. Like, clearly it's amazing looking. There's no doubt about it. But I had wondered about that. And I had also wondered, there are so many different types of Mandalorian armor, and we've seen even Mandalorian armor that fans have created, let's say 501st Legion, like there's so much out there. And so, I'm sure someone has pondered this question about, if that was maybe, it clearly wasn't the first armor that had that level of Beskar. And there were actually even ships, from what I've been told, that were made out of partial Beskar. But it's just interesting to see this type of reiteration of Beskar, because I personally have never seen such a high level of it in an armor. So most of us have grown up knowing Boba Fett's armor. That's the one that we're mostly familiar with. But I think as the years progress, Catherine, we're going to see more and more reiterations.
Well, it's like Jango's armor before it became Boba's. It used to be this kind of crisp Millennium color, and it was a bit muted in color. It wasn't as shiny because he probably had it for a long time. Whereas Boba Fett did confirm, or will go on to confirm, I should say, that his outfit is the same exact one that his father had. Yes. And he obviously painted it and had it, I guess, for his own purposes. Whereas Din, I think it's also ultimately comes down, like, this is like fresh Beskar, so it's going to be really nice and shiny, and they don't have time to paint, because I think Greef and Carr are like, dude, we got to get out of here. It's just why they ultimately leave. And I like how when they're going through the tunnel, they can't figure out where to go, and even though they find a boat with this really weird cross between an astromech droid and like a standing bipedal droid, it's kind of weird. Yeah. And Din's like, oh no, we can't. And they're like, we have to. We can't say no just because it's a droid here, And so they get on, and it's like taking off down the lava river, but I guess the droid isn't going fast and not doing what they wanted to do, so he just blows it to pieces.
Yeah.
And this is also where we see sort of the completion of one of his arcs, because like IG-11, I guess, has the ability to have like X-ray vision and scan ahead, and he sees that they're all, a bunch of troopers are like right outside the tunnel, and they're going to kill them all. And Din's like, well, you have to obey your directive and protect us. He's like, I can't. There's no way you're getting out of this. And in order to retain my directive, I have to go forward and do this. And it's like a Terminator 2 moment kind of thing, where he decides to get into the lava. And it's neat because Din actually sticks up for IG-11. It's like he's changed his mind a bit. Even though just not long earlier, when this particular mission started, he was so terrified of the idea of having to team up with him again. And he's finally sort of come around to that, and
it's a good thing too, isn't it? I mean, he can't continue through the galaxy with this thing, and it was kind of holding him back a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
And so he's been able to kind of get away with saying, well, if I had to choose a droid or a human, I'll choose a human, or, anything but a droid. And now he's finding himself in a situation, and even the droid himself said, I can tell by the inflection in your voice. I'm like, oh man, really? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't keep a secret anymore. So, IG-11 actually self-detonates, which is very ironic, because this is something that he was trying to stop him from doing in the beginning of the series, because he kept wanting to self-detonate, and he's like, no, don't self-detonate. And here he goes and does that. And I asked a friend about this. I said, could you really put a bomb there and kill all those troopers? They're like, yeah, you probably could, because the blast would be too strong for them.
Oh yeah, and that was clever, because not only would he be fulfilling his mandate to protect the child, it would also be fulfilling his corporate mandate to not allow himself to be captured by the
Exactly. That is perfect. That's exactly it. And so, they are all kind of traumatized by this, because they were not expecting to lose this IG unit that seemed to have won them over and done so many things to save them, and to save Mando, and to save the baby. Like, he's done so many things over and over again, proving his worth. So, that was very it was a touching moment to see what happened. And as they exit this, let's say, lava tube, so to speak, this lava cave, they can see the TIE fighter going, kind of flying around. And of course, Moth is like, I got to get my TIE fighter, and see if I can get them. And, we have that famous line from from Greef Karga, where he says, come on, baby, do the magic hand thing. And, Grogu just does this little wave thing.
He's like, oh, that's all I can do.
And Grogu does not understand what he's asking him to do, and if and that's okay. But it is very funny, very funny thing. You ask kids to do something, and they do something different. But honestly, this scene where Din puts on the jetpack and flies up into the air, and it's like it feels like it's something straight out of. I mean, we did see a bit of it.
That's right. She gave him a jetpack too, the armor.
She did, and it is something we have seen, the Mandalorians fly around, but this one felt more like it was straight out of the Clone Wars to me. Like someone shoots he shoots his, I don't know what it's called, but it grabs onto the TIE fighter, and then it draws him, and he's holding on, and I'm like, this is crazy. Yeah. It was so good, Catherine.
Yeah, he hooks the cable on there, and he's like hanging on to the wing, and I'm like, is this really happening? Is this so weird that this is your solution to this? And he manages. It takes him a couple tries, but he eventually gets a thermal detonator on there, and then cuts the wire, and he just goes flying down onto the ground and hits trying to land, and then he just hits it, and of course the bomb destroys the wing and causes the fighter to crash, and of course, cliche, it crashes over the hill where they can't see what's going on, and then you have the happy parting of the ways where Greef decides that, okay, you could take the kid and go, because you see the client's dead, Gideon's dead, so as they think. Everybody else is kind of, the troopers. I don't know. This is admittedly a weird thing, because I guess Moth Gideon sent all the other troopers from the village back because they clearly had gotten outnumbered at the cantina. So, but all these troops seem to be gone now, because Greef Karga and Cara Dune decide to stay behind and walk back to the village as if there's no problem. And it's like, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, aren't there a bunch of troops still there? I guess maybe not. I don't know. And that's another thing too, that Cara decides not to accompany Din once again, and she's like, no, I'm going to stay here and presumably join the guild or work for Greef, because he's like, oh yeah, we got some job positions open now after all the chaos.
Well, she certainly needed, better work than sort of like random fights in the bar and things of that nature, which is fine for her to do that. But I think she doesn't want to lay low anymore. I think that she, might try and find a place where she can be accepted and people can come to her, and, she can have a calling card and people can find her and make a life for herself, because it's no life trying to hide out on Sorghum or wherever she was. She's way too high profile. She kind of draws a lot of attention. She just couldn't survive there, but she could make a name for herself in Navarro. And maybe Greef could pull some strings for her and, say, look, she really is a good guy. She doesn't really need to be chastised this way. Let's kind of forgive this. She helped me, stop these bad guys. He himself might have put himself on the line, and she might have earned some credits with the Republic that way too. So, I think this whole thing has changed her entire life, and she was not expecting that. She was only going there because an Imperial was involved, and now her whole life has turned around. Things are looking up. The whole thing has changed. So I kind of think that it's a victory for her in a sense, because she's shown her worth. And, not only has she shown her worth, but she's also shown that she knows how to handle situations, and she doesn't want to be hiding away anymore. So that was a good thing for her. And also, we get a very nice surprise. As you said, the TIE fighter landed behind the hill, which would indicate that, the person inside is still alive.
And of course, the Jawas are already there ripping it apart.
Of course. And they're like doing their thing, they've got their whatever it is they're using, because they're masters at doing this. And you see this light protrude from the TIE fighter.
Yes, the Gideon has the Dark Saber, which makes sense because he's said to be the guy who committed the purge on Mandalore.
And I can't tell you how many times I had heard, as I was watching, I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Is that the, I was like, is that the, it's the Dark Saber, it's like, oh my God, there's that excitement that was really associated with that moment. I know I was like, oh my God, it's the Dark Saber, because we've never seen it in live action. This is the first time we've seen the Dark Saber in live action, right?
Yes. And I guess I forgot to mention too, that the other reason we expect to have it is that he even knew Din Djarin's name because of that purge. And he and Kara were convinced that he was executed. And it's like, well, he's got the Dark Saber and he knows Din's name, and that was another funny thing too, where Grief is like, so what if he knows your name? He's like, nobody knows my name. And it's kind of neat that he would even. I get a sense that Moth Gideon doesn't just know his name. He's probably got one of those minds. He remembers everybody, like he's like a computer, And so he's got the Dark Saber, and yeah, it was foolish that they didn't go back to check to make sure he was gone.
It was foolish. Din mentions that Moth was an ISB officer while on, I guess, during the Purge. And then he even mentions Kara's name, Kara Cynthia Dune, like he knows her full name, and that she was a drop, soldier. And boy, that must have felt bad, to know that somebody knows that much about you and you don't really know much about them. And, he's there to stay. And so they do realize that, it was a little bit more, as Kara had mentioned in one of the early episodes. She says, it can't just be about this. There must be more to this. She actually, I can't remember when she says it, but she says there has to be more to this than just what we're seeing.
Yeah.
And there is. And while we do kind of come to a conclusion at the end of this episode, as we both said, by seeing the Darksaber kind of pierce the TIE fighter and seeing Moth with his cloak flying in the wind and with the Darksaber, kind of in front of him, it does feel like he's going to come back in the next season to kick ass and to take names. There we go. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. The saber was up and the wind is blowing, and you can just tell that he's like, this isn't over, and while it felt good that they did get away, it also felt good to know that there was more coming, didn't it?
Yeah, because you don't get to see him until the final episode, and it's like, well, there's got to be. He obviously he didn't die because the TIE fighter. That would be a really anticlimactic way to have killed this big villain, and that it just crashes behind the hill. It's like, yeah, he's alive. We'll see. But not just that he's alive. You knew when the camera cut over that there's got to be a surprise. Like what's the surprise going to be? And it's like, oh, okay, because we know obviously because of the history of the Darksaber, that's going to be a major point of contention going forward.
Yeah, and I think what they've done in this first season was to really kind of set the ground rules for Din, for Grogu, and for Greef Karga. And they have resources, they have skills, they have tools. But let's be honest, we know that they're in for the fight of their life, don't we?
Yeah, it's like he's not going to stop searching. And I mean, yeah, Din's naive enough to think that it's over, and Kara and Greef think, oh, it's over. It's like, no, it's not over, especially if the fact that somebody who they were so certain was dead, who's such a big deal, it's like, well, obviously he's people are going, if he is dead, then people are going to miss him, are going to start asking questions, and they don't seem to be concerned about that at all. They're just like, oh, okay, we'll just take off, and which is admittedly a little weird, but the writing, but okay, so then off they go, and it's like, okay, we'll see where this goes for season 2. And we wondered also if Din was going to be able to find any Jedi out there, to reunite Grogu. Yeah. If not, I thought at the end of the season that, well, maybe instead of finding Jedi, he'll actually find other, members of that species, like find their planet or something. I thought that was something else that they might have explored, but yeah.
No, there were a lot of unanswered questions, and we wanted those answers, and we still are in search of those answers. Of course, we all wanted to know, wouldn't it be great if we found out the origin of the Yoda species? Like, wouldn't it be great if we found out who Grogu's parents are? These were all sorts of things that we had questions about, and still have a lot of questions about, and really want the answers. And also just trying to figure out what the future of Din is going to be, because obviously he's not an ordinary person anymore, is he? He's not an ordinary Mandalorian anymore. This entire chain of events has put him in the forefront. And it also means that since he's no longer with, let's say, Children of the Watch, what are the odds of, as you said, him finding another Jedi, or even seeing other Mandalorians now that he is no longer in the Enclave? Where does his future lie, and where could they go? Where they wouldn't be noticed. Like it would seem to me that if you were walking around with Grogu, everyone would notice that. And so, we see it in season 2 coming, which you and I are going to review. We see time and time again how much Grogu stands out because he is so different from a lot of creatures that we see. So, these unanswered questions have just made us more curious. I think that with the introduction of season 2, we're hoping that we do get a lot of those answers. But season 1 for me was just a lot of fun, and just finding out, where everybody's boundaries are and where the future is. Clearly, we already know that Din has to accept being, the father, so to speak, of Grogu. But we also know that his life has dramatically changed because that enclave isn't there anymore. So, these are all things that I think, make it interesting, a new start for both of them. And I enjoyed it very much. What did you think of season 1?
I liked it. I liked the first 3 episodes a lot. I thought it dipped a bit in the middle and then it picked up great in the end.
Yes, that I would say that is definitely an accurate description of how it was. And I also was going to say that, clearly after this season, I looked forward to the next season, which is something that was very exciting for me. And what I was going to say is just wanted to thank you, Catherine, for reviewing season 1 with me. And I look forward to do season 2 with you, of course. And, just where can people find you if they want to see more of the videos and commentary from you?
You can find me at Slice Side on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me on the Phantasmagorium Show Wednesday nights at 6 Pacific with Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. And you can find me every second and fourth Sunday of the month on the Virtual Cantina Network hosting the Unifying Force.
That's perfect. And for your viewers, you can always find me here on Positive Fandom. You can also find me on, I can't remember the name of the show. Yes. You can also find me on Toxic Femininity on Monday nights on Midnight's Edge channel at 8 o'clock. And sometimes you can find me on Fridays on Midnight's Edge in the morning at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can always find me on the Bird Network. And I did want to thank you for joining us for this season 1 review of the Mandalorian series. If you are just picking up this video, we have a few more before this. And you should probably check those out too if you enjoyed this one. And as I've said, we have a season 2 review coming up as well. And I hope that this video finds you well. I hope you enjoyed it. And I was going to say, remember, for you viewers out there, always to be kind.